Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Mishmash Monday Street Fighter Battle Lounge. We actually have multiple lounges today. We're doing that split lounge thing again, where we have several lounges open with several team members, and we're going to be bouncing around between them. I am Kanzuki Dynasty. Rillian may be joining us in and out as the night progresses. And today I am looking at levels of components of the matchup, looking at my notes, trying to see what I can write down and see what I can figure out and all of that.
Let's do this.
And just overall working out matchups and what I need to remember for each one.
Round one. Fight.
So starting off, we have Alex and Ryu. Or Ken in this case, actually.
Looks like I won. All right. Round two. Fight. Alex wins. Round one. Fight.
And so, in taking notes on matchups, there's tends to be for many matchups a sort of progression. Obviously, you have your core style, and that's going to be your basic approach to everything. But from there, your opponents will have particular approaches, or adapt in certain ways, or do certain things that they just like to do that will cause you personally trouble. And from there, it becomes a matter of effectively adding on layers. First thing to figure out is the first thing that effectively changes the shape of the matchup so that it's just something you like better and your opponent can annoy you less or whatever because something you've added or are thinking about, etc., is now preventing them from just doing whatever they feel like. Then eventually they'll adapt and figure out a way to change the shape of the matchup in their favor. And this goes back and forth several times. So the trick is, and something I'm going to be trying to work on today a bit, to figure out, well, what each of those layers are. It's easy to note certain things that are relevant to a matchup, or just to remember about opponent characters. And I have some notes of that style as well. But when you are loading into a match online or other such things, or just when you need a quick summary and don't have a whole lot of time to review, it can be very important to keep track of specifically what those layers are. In just one or two lines, really. And so that is my goal for today. I'll probably have a bit of Kareen and a bit of Sakura going on here. But overall, I need to do the same thing for both of them.
Alex wins. It's go time. Let's do this. Kareen Kanzuki, Alex. This will be perfect for a warm-up.
So for Alex, I have some notes. I don't think that I have the concise level answers yet.
Okay, let's rumble.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
Round one. Fight.
But it seems that for Kareen, I actually do have something written down here for that.
Fight.
And so the first thought that I have for my Alex matchup specifically. Oops. is actually the first one is actually a combination of things. Using stand medium kick to limit his advances, which is not something I'll necessarily automatically do in my style, since I will tend to be focusing on other things. Paired with air-to-airs for head crush and such. And this is actually a rather old note, but now that I have that training to actually air-to-air on reaction to certain things more easily, it may be feasible to actually execute this. Sometimes, obviously, you can figure out an answer, but that doesn't mean, I'm sure anyone who's played a fighting game before will know, knowing the answer doesn't mean you can do it. And I can't do it perfectly yet.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Round 2. Fight.
But it's enough that I can consider it an option to work with.
When making that kind of note, it's very important to note the reason, especially for the first couple of lines in your dissertation, exactly why you're doing this thing. Because sometimes you're doing it to stop something your opponent is doing that prevents you from playing your own natural style. If it is so successful that it stops your opponent from doing that thing altogether, then you no longer have to worry about it. Your focus never needs to be on that thing unless your opponent won't give up at whatever you're trying to stop.
Indeed. And I have that to some degree, where, for this particular one, I note not just that I need to use my air-to-air and my stand medium kick to deal with things, but specifically the things that they're designed to deal with. I could probably do to add a little detail to this note, but at least it has a basic concept, that the air-to-airs are for head crushes and such, and the stand medium kick is to limit his advances if essentially I'm having trouble in footsies, I suppose.
This is most important in order to give you context for when things seem to stop working or feel like it isn't helping anymore, to be able to quickly reference, has it stopped helping because my opponent has stopped trying to do the thing that I was trying to stop? Obviously, if your opponent is not advancing into your medium kick, you do not need to hit this medium kick to stop them from advancing, but if you keep on pressing it, they may do something else that beats it, and if they're expecting that, then obviously they're at advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Your goal is generally to only do each thing until it gets you back to your own style, because most of the time, your style is something that doesn't change too much or need to change too much if you do get your opponent to slow down or stop. You just get to do some set of interconnected things that you like to do, and that's it. It's the end of the consideration.
I'm really not very experienced with Colleen's V-Trigger too. And countered. Unfortunately, I don't have any notes for Colleen. In either form.
It's often true that characters that we meet up on less often have exactly that feeling that goes with them. You might have figured out something in the last time you did fight them, but unless you remember to note it somehow, it's a little hard to remember, the same way that those sorts of things happen in life in different ways when you are studying for exams or whatever else. You're simply always stuck in that place of there's a lot of information, and the particular small piece of information you need to do a job right now may evade you.
Indeed. Especially since there's so many things to think about. If I go right back from Colleen to Alex, or switch to another team member's lounge and fight a Kareen or Ken or whatever else the case may be, I'm obviously not going to still be thinking about it, and that information could just fall by the wayside. So the trick for the moment would be to figure out what the level 1, effectively, in this case, is. I'm aware to some degree that one does not just get to play standard footsies with Colleen because of her ability to predict and counter you so easily in certain situations. But I don't necessarily have all that much of a solution, other than simply punishing her own mistakes in some degree. Not the most reliable of plans, of course.
This sort of situation can come up even for, or I would even say especially for, characters you fight fairly often. As long as the person you fight them with, or the player using the character, remains mostly the same. It's easy to feel as if, or to shift mentally so that we don't write the notes, or we think that it does not matter because we know this particular opponent, or even that we know that they play a slightly unconventional form of the character. It's easy to go, well, this doesn't really need to be noted down, I can train with this person whenever I want, and so on. But it's not necessarily enough. Therefore, as a result, regardless of the fact that Colleen matchup experience can come from me within the team, you'll often hear team members mention that they aren't very good at fighting other Colleen. This isn't specifically because I don't play her much like other Colleen players, I do somewhat do this, but rather because since they do fight me constantly, it's very much less likely that they'll actually write down anything about how to do it. There comes a point where one is fighting the player and not the character, and learning to tell the two apart can sometimes be important. But at least if you've written down as much as you can from that, or somehow specifically memorized it in small pieces, while the number one thing you want to do against a different style of Colleen may be different, you should probably have enough of them to say, oh, this one looks like the one I need for this situation, and be able to work your way forward or backward from there.
Yes, and sometimes I have trouble with that personally in the sense of, okay, so now is this particular thing something for the character that I'm facing, or is it for the player specifically? I have, for instance, some notes on Alex, and I have some additional notes on DeWolf specifically. And if I tried to apply the DeWolf notes to another Alex, it would simply fail directly, most likely. And in this particular case, they're obvious, but it's not always necessarily immediately so.
Round one. Fight.
Cammy is sort of a similar case to what Raylene was just discussing, but in a little bit of a different sense. I also don't have any notes of either variety on Cammy specifically, but I am our resident Cammy player, and have a bit of experience with how she works from that. I also, when thinking of it, immediately remember effectively certain things learned from Cammy Bot, such as the ability to throw various things. And not necessarily that I'm super reliable at it, but that it's certainly far from impossible to intercept V-skills. How useful this may be in any given matchup, I don't know. But I do at least have the experience to bring it to mind. So we'll see if I do face this person, and I do face their Cammy, how that will go.
Round one. Fight.
And in the case that DeWolf is the victor, I have gone and reread my level 2 for the Alex matchup that I have written down. And we'll see if I end up getting the chance to use that. It will of course depend on his reaction to level 1. Or if I simply just get to do whatever I please.
Round two.
For any reason.
Fight. Alex wins. It's go time. Let's do this. Green Kanzuki. This would be perfect for a warm-up. Okay, let's rumble. Round one. Fight.
So the first step is simply, of course, doing whatever I feel like. The second step, well, the 0th step is doing whatever I feel like. The first step thereafter is the air-to-air and stand medium kick aspect discussed. And for the specific purpose is mentioned as well. These are older notes which actually predate my more concrete description of my preferred playstyle. But unsurprisingly, as I do like my character, and it would still be suited to my style of play, whatever I chose as my solutions to things. Set air-to-airs is one of the base things that I like to do. We did actually get to see the beginnings of level 2. However, it didn't seem to last very long, so I won't get into that just yet.
Round 1. Fight!
The wolf is actually forcing a variant of my second level that I have written down, it seems like. Oof. The curse of talking and playing.
Looks like you could use more training. Round
In that, rather than backdashing out and trying to whiff punish his various approaching specials, he seems to be doing me the favor of walking backwards before using them. So I'm going to have to make a simple adaptation, although I can recognize the same situation.
Whenever you can manage to do it, and you believe that you could also remember the correct solution to a situation just by being aware of the situation, it is better on your side to write down the situation itself or something to remind you of it, rather than the specifics of what you are actually supposed to do. This is both to help you understand how to deal with different players who have different ideas of what to do in that situation, and to shift yourself from thinking about the button, which is sometimes an easy way to get yourself caught up in this button, this attack, this special move is a solution to the problem, when really the problem itself is the situation, and if your opponent isn't converting well off it, doesn't do the same thing after it, or just doesn't have enough resources, because sometimes they require the resource to deal with it, then it means that you're probably playing fine and don't need to make any specific effort to do anything different than you were doing before. Or sometimes it means that you need to make that effort but much less, and similar. There's a lot more nuance to things when you remind yourself, this is the situation I'm concerned about, than simply, this is the button I'm supposed to hit because reasons.
That's sort of where we just were, actually. Because I have it written as specifically backdashing out of stampedes and then aim to whiff punish things. Actually, I didn't end up paying too much attention to the details, more so realizing the situation that was intended to deal with.
Round 1. Fight!
And I'll probably tweak that a little bit, so I don't get tripped up in the future either. I may need a little time with Karinbot, actually.
I can see right through you.
Round two. Fight.
Just to, be ready to punish that sort of move, generally. As Flash Elbow, one of Alex's useful approaches in this situation. It's actually rather relatively minus according to one of my other notes.
Well, in this case, that's probably just as relevant. It does depend on which move has been used, and keeping your notes up to date relative to changes in games is also a large part of what you're doing, but it can also help you to make the whole process much easier. If you've made a note about a character, how you deal with a situation, or what that situation comes up from, you can also use that information to see, for example, this change has occurred in the game. You can just go through patch notes and go, oh, this move is more punishable now, so I don't need to do this, or this move is less punishable, so it's going to cause me more problems than before. And from there, just update your notes without ever actually needing to fight the character. Just understanding the patch notes can be enough to at least give you a new idea to try out the next time, or at least not be caught by surprise. At worst, you'll have to go, I don't know what to do about this change. I don't really know what this change means. But I have a note here regarding the move that was changed, which means that there's a chance that when I fight that character again, there will be something I might need to do differently, or something I might need to shift on. It's easy to get caught up in remembering, oh, I fought this character last year, and this helped me, this is what I was able to do. And then someone has to come and tell you, oh, that was changed this season, or that was changed this patch. Not something that you saw a lot in older games, but you still saw a little of it when people moved from one version of a game to another, as in like Super Street Fighter to Super Turbo, etc. And you get this idea that you normally fight this matchup this way, and one thing changes and the entire thing shifts. Being able to recognize, that is different even before you start, is one of the strengths of patch notes. You can simply read and do your best to understand it. If you don't understand it, put it along with your notes. You might remember to ask someone when you see them. You might remember to try something different when you play.
Indeed. And so on that note, since you did bring it up, and I do know Alex got some changes recently, has that particular move changed much? Should I delete or edit that particular note?
Alex's light slash elbow is now -2, should be.
Alright then. What is his flash chop?
Flash chop should all be -4. I do not believe that was changed at all.
My note says it was -8, so who knows where that came from. I will update it regardless.
Probably worth a check. I might be the one that's in error here, so I will go look for it while
Alright,
you,
thank you.
If you're a more tactile player, don't go worrying about frame data and things like that. If you see a move was changed and you remember how you punished it before, go in training mode, let that character if you can. Or, if you really don't have the character, which is something that happens often, you do have the fortune now of being able to watch high or even players around your own level. Just search for your own rank and look for the closest player who actually plays that character. and watch a couple of their replays. The system now can play it in slow motion. You can check if they played against a character similar to your own, or if you understand how to read the frame data overall, you can simply read it directly in the game if you know what you're looking for, and decide from there. There are lots of methods now to get used to this without specifically needing to be able to look at a frame data page and go down and recognize which move it was, remember which of the moves this is. You do have the visual ability to do this. Watch a couple replays, wait until you see the thing in question, and then turn on the attack data and step through it. See what happens. If you're not the type that likes to play matches in slow motion to figure something like that out, then most likely you'll just enjoy understanding it in real time once you've gotten back to it. Which means mostly you're just going online to find someone who actually plays the character. At the end of the day though, we are back to discussing the actual thing. Alex's light kick slash elbow, light slash elbow is in that fact -2. Medium kick and heavy kick are 6 and 7, and yes is -10, meaning that I don't know if they improved the others, but there was definitely some high numbers up there. His flash chops, however, are all regular ones are -4 after all, and the EX is only -2 also. He's a character that spends a lot of time spacing himself really well with his slightly minus moves and getting not necessarily advantage, but a lot of intimidation factor going on when he does things that way.
Alright then. My note is updated, so I shouldn't get confused about that in the future.
Alex wins. Round 1. Fight.
And so, all of that consideration as well, now that I have her back in front of me, consideration of the Colleen. Part of my problem is that even if I do have some experience fighting Brillian's Colleen, although I'd probably talk about Karine more often. I don't have those notes for sort of the reasons that were mentioned before. And when someone else is playing Colleen, whether it's simply the recognition that it's not her, or whether they're playing, even if similar, perhaps a little bit different, and something in that makes me second guess my recognition. I don't really have anything written down to fall back on in terms of understanding the matchup.
one. Fight. Round two. Fight.
And so as a result of that, I suppose I'll simply have to go through the steps. If our Nami Nami wins, and see, alright, what am I having trouble with here? And try and figure out what needs to be done, or can be done, to shift the matchup to one that I prefer.
You can't escape. Colleen wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Also, your connection to them seems surprisingly good.
I guess I failed to think about where they are. Where are they?
Well, the flag up is Japan, and it's 3 bars, so maybe?
Well,
Of course the flag means, right? That's why it does not necessarily imply that you are, in fact, in that place, because you don't have to pick the location that it actually says. You absolutely can be in the US, continental US, and give yourself like a Japanese flag, I believe. I haven't changed this since the last set of people that tried to do it. And since obviously you are able to log in on your account if you travel, you should still be able to do this even if you are somewhere. It doesn't exactly just immediately change a player to whatever the country they happen to actually be playing from.
you just
That
had to
said,
mention
with
our
the 3
connection.
bars, it is 3 bars, so maybe it is just actually Japan and just really good line from to wherever they are. But yes, the first rule of Colleen versus Karin is rather hard for Hansuki Dynasty because it is don't play footsies.
Not in my highest of skill sets.
But it's not as simple as don't play footsies. It's rather that at every moment where you expect to need to hit a footsie button, just think of it as an opponent who has an invincible way through it, which is not actually all that rare for the game. Birdie can do this. Laura can do this. Mika can do this. The difference is that Colleen hurts you for it in a much more direct way and does it immediately. So, basically, you treat it the same way. If you think it's about time that you normally would hit a footsie button, do your best to simply not hit it. Make your opponent use the counter because you can't really react to things with that counter. And then punish that. This is particularly meaningful if the player does not yet know the precise range to hit it from, and they did make it much harder to safely hit that move. it became a -8 move, meaning that even if you spaced it perfectly, even if your opponent was not aware, there's a much higher chance that hitting one of their 6-frame moves will in fact clip you, even if they're a little late, even if you're a little distracted, maybe even if you're a little too far out normally, there's some people who can micro walk into it. And if they're really aware, it opened up a whole bunch of standing kicks that work really well for the purpose. You just have to be super on point reversal timing speed. This is harder online, but for the most part, the Colleen would then have to risk doing EX mid counter to hope that you got beat by it and that you messed up somewhere. And this could lead to really bad things for them too. Overall, therefore, all you really have to do as your first level is consider not hitting the button in that space to be the footsies.
Indeed. This is something that I have learned from you. So it's sort of a matter of applying it in just slightly different situations, I guess? And obviously many similar ones. I wonder if I can write that down as, like, the footsies of no button. Or something. Because I need some sort of effectively one-liner for it so that I can file it in my simple matchup levels notes, more or less.
Most of the notes that we use for this actually specifically say withhold, because withhold is a fairly clear term. It doesn't mean never do this, it doesn't mean this is a bad idea specifically. For most people, that word is interpreted as, maybe you don't want to do this as much. For example, there is another form that actually specifically says stand heavy punch withhold, which is one of Council of Dynasty's notes for Boxer, i.e. Balrog. It's not really absolutely required, but if you try to play footsies with Balrog using Karin's stand heavy punch, you're putting yourself at much more risk than you need to. But it doesn't mean don't hit this button ever. It's relative to her own style. It is recognition that she uses stand heavy punch often, and that she should withhold some of it. Figuring out exactly which one you want to use for this can be hard though, so if you find that it's not working to put something as simple as that, just whatever it is that will make you remember this as quickly as possible. Even that is something you can craft to improve yourself.
Indeed, and that's sort of the problem is, it's easy to say that for one button, but how do you say that for all of footsies? In any case, I will come up with something. Just possibly after the match. Alright, so let's see, how can I put this?
It's go time.
Ah. Alright then, our Colleen has gone. So unless someone else returns, we can shift around and see what is in Cosmic Wolf's lounge. Assuming there's space after this match.
I do not, in fact, believe that there is space.
Well, that simplifies the consideration. We'll have to hope someone shows up.
This will be perfect for a warm-up.
Hopefully that note will work.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
Okay, let's rumble. Round one. Fight!
But we do strongly advise this because there's really nothing worse than fighting a match, especially in ranked or casuals, where you only get 1 or 2 chances at it, feeling completely lost, and then going back to either your own old notes or your previous experience with the character, or even telling a friend that you couldn't manage it and they remind you, did you remember to do that you said you would do every time? There are few worse feelings in fighting games, to know that, hey, at some point I actually knew how to do this. In fact, I was doing it really well, and then I forgot about it entirely and lost.
Indeed.
Looks like you could use more training.
Especially because you realize instantly in that moment, well, crud, I could have had a much better experience with this whole thing if I just remembered this one little blatantly obvious detail that I always remember, but not today.
And that's why you see the pros checking their notes. These are people who do this literally for a living in some cases. They're good, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of information to remember, a lot of matchup stuff to remember. They're professionals, so they tend to have notes on people rather than specifically characters, but even then, maybe they've just got notes on characters. We've occasionally seen people on Twitter share what their notes look like, and they don't really look like some specific fabulous thing. It's sometimes simple stuff like reminding yourself, use armor more in this matchup as Urian or as Birdie, because some matchups it's a really bad idea to try a lot going for it or spending much time on it. And then reminding yourself, oh no, this is the matchup where I'm supposed to use that. I'm supposed to use that all the time. Because otherwise you would fall back into your habits from fighting some other character where it's not worth your time, and potentially lose out on a lot of good experience that way.
Round one. Fight!
And of course, having notes is often useful in another way. Even if you can remember whatever it is your notes say, you can always forget that one thing, or you can misremember the context. Remember, I was supposed to hit this button, but not why. And, well, we've gone through the problems with that. It's nothing worse than having your own correct memories of your notes or of your matchup or plans be incomplete and work against you instead of for you as a result. Especially since if you were going to then remember the correct thing, it might not be different.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Round two. Fight. You win. Round one. Fight.
I can see right through you.
Round two. Fight.
Another slightly weird thing that at least can come up that lends a bit of credence to the idea that one should write down situations rather than necessarily buttons or such is that you could just be used to the first few levels of a matchup and not really paying a whole lot of attention because you're just doing the right things naturally, because either it's your style, you figured it out, or, well, simply you've already learned those pieces. And then you come to the point where now you're missing something. Done.
It is in fact easy to get trapped in the normal, where normal is whatever normally wins, to the point where you've not even thought about the fact that the things you're doing might not even be the first layer of something. This is super important to understand as you go. Your opponent may already just not try the thing that would be most effective against your style. Either they've been discouraged from it from some other experience, or just have not thought of it, or didn't know how one of their own moves worked, or similar, and therefore you've just never faced it. It might have a relatively easy solution, and once you've applied that solution, it puts you right back to where you were, but until you actually remember and apply that solution, you're not going to get anything. You're going to get destroyed, more or less, because you're not reacting to the main thing, and it's really frustrating simply because the opponent can mostly just repeat this until they win, because you don't remember, haven't thought of, or have never even experienced the need to counter it.
I have no idea what went wrong there. Well, in any case, let's see if anyone interesting and new has joined.
two. Fight. You can't escape. Alex wins. Round one. Fight.
Alice's long jump buttons and flash shot can make Manat's life quite miserable. Dwarf has also trained at least a bit with Manat Bot, partially for the precise purpose of learning to do things like quickly approach into Hyper Bomb and other command grabs. Well, not other command grabs, but generally playing the throw game on a character like this and having the correct spacing to stay out of a lot of her stuff. Armanat Bot does not really keep herself away from you with spam buttons in a particular way, but Alice as a character gets to disrespect most of that quite easily, meaning that he doesn't really need to practice that aspect of Manat Bot. It's more so a matter of shifting the flow of the match to the point where she will hesitate or throw out the orb without a benefit. Once that's done, Alice just more or less needs to get in and poke her at least once before the orb is recalled.
Alex wins. It's go time.
Now I wonder if I should continue playing Karine and getting practice with that, or if I should go over and see about working out some of the equivalent levels with Sakura. Unfortunately, I have no coin on hand to flip. Let's do it.
This would be perfect for a warm-up.
So, as for my specific notes for this matchup, I do not have quite as much as I do with Karine. Although I do have a particular note that refers to a specific point in the match where I end up in a bad place to hit Atoshi, but tend to do it anyway. And so in that space, I need to consider doing a dash medium kick instead. which is actually a bit of a psychological trick.
Round one. Fight.
Which should hopefully be effective. I haven't gotten as much opportunity to test this one out yet, as it's only from my most recent training session.
Psychological trick in question mentioned is simply to get yourself to consider whether or not the thing you want to do is safe or a good idea.
Indeed.
If you look for something else with approximately the same either frames or intent, or let's even say chance of hitting the opponent, usually similar hitbox, even if it doesn't have all the same properties, unless you can tell yourself specifically, the reason I'm doing A and not B is because of some property of A. In this case, we are considering Otoshi versus a dash-up medium kick. The difference would be that the dash-up medium kick would be vulnerable to a long, low attack, especially if mistimed. But if that wasn't the reason, if you weren't specifically aiming to go over what you expect to be a long reactive low, then you didn't have any reason to do one over the other. This isn't to say you should just start spamming the other either. It's more so to make you think, well, why am I doing this at all? Is this the correct space for this? Just think about it long enough to decide if this is the exact moment you want to do that sort of thing. And it can in fact help you make the decision to do it, rather than to just constantly hold it back.
Indeed.
Because you will realize, in the case of this Otoshi example, oh no, I really am at the perfect Otoshi spacing, and my opponent's mindset is definitely toward the type that gets hit by this, or gets flustered and lets me get in using it. So, no, I'm confirming through this trick on myself that this is the moment to actually use Otoshi, rather than autopiloting into it and potentially putting myself in danger.
I don't think that I was supposed to actually activate my V-trigger in this particular match. Darn.
Part of the reason that we often use the standard medium kick for this
Excuse me.
is because it tends to hit somewhat upward, meaning that if the opponent chooses to jump on a reaction to you dashing toward them, you have a chance of clipping them out of the air. Some characters have moves that take them into the air and bring them down quickly again, and these moves are often usable in the same way. You can do things like dash up air legs, dash up into the air fireball for Akuma, instead of demon flip. These aren't always good ideas, but the original thing was not necessarily a good idea either, and that's the point. The hope is that you will learn to assess the situation in real time, rather than letting your autopilot take over and push you to particular places. We do have bots for testing your autopilot, but they neither help you to diminish it, nor really clarify what you should be looking for in any given opponent, as they're just bots. They do random-ish things, and even though they are quite pushed toward doing specifically useful things for whatever the character is, the characters in this case that are mainly meant to do that are characters like Fault and Nash, where in the case of Fault you are able to autopilot forward, i.e. offense, and she will occasionally beat you up for doing that wrong. And in Nash's case, you can autopilot your defense and he will catch you for doing that wrong. But they don't really move between them, and often the reason we end up autopiloting is because we have been lulled into a sense of I need to attack or I need to defend by a particular set of opponent movements, and then didn't rethink the situation when something shifted.
Oof, darn. I suppose parry is kind of a problem there. And so now I think we're sort of getting to the point where it's about time for me to be looking for an actual level 1 to the matchup, rather than just the I have a tendency to do this particular thing and it's the best habit in the world. Which can contribute to that, but I think honestly that one is not so much matchup specific in terms of its utility. Dang. So
But let's head over to Cosmic Wolf and find out what he's been up to.
Alright, sounds good. The problem I would have encountered there, though, is trying to figure out what particular thing was causing me the most trouble or such. Or what did I want to deal with, more so, to put things into a bit of a more friendly situation.
It's for this reason that it's good to have a pet button. A favorite thing to do basically no matter what. You either end up understanding, as in the boxer matchup, this is a withhold. No matter how much I want to do it, I shouldn't because this character beats it really well. Or you realize, I can't get to this space where I get to do the thing. I like the thing. I need to do the thing more.
Indeed.
And figuring out how to get to that space is important.
And then you can look at what you get hit by or get in trouble with in those particular moments where you're trying to do that. Fair enough.
Round 1. Fight. Round 2. Fight.
Nikali versus Fang is always interesting is because Nikali is one of the few characters that can just reactively hit Fang for doing a ton of things. Whereas everyone else has to deal with him putting the shield in front of him or specific spacings relative to how he throws out Nishikyu. Nikali cares very little, meaning that Fang tends to need to play somewhat more aggressively and use those sorts of tools more so for pressure and positioning. Fortunately, it still works out mostly because Nikali doesn't have a lot of strong defenses against the way Fang moves. He can commit to some fairly heavy stuff, but because of the same issue, he can't use his ground pound to make Fang land on it most of the time. And he can't therefore set up a situation where Fong jumps and lands on the attack, and he can't follow it in. He's doing it and then it's over. As a character, he doesn't control Fong all that well. He doesn't have any strong moves for dealing with very specific things that are done. The main benefit he has, in fact, is that Fong's buttons are kind of odd and tend to be at least possible to anti-air with relative ease for Necalli, but it still ends up being mostly just his Rising Light, his uppercut, that does this. He can anti-air Fong in other ways, but similar to Necalli himself, there are some dangerous jump-in buttons happening there.
Well, assuming he continues to play Fong, I certainly have zero experience against, Fongs with Ibuki. Sorry, with Sakura. Also with Ibuki, but I wasn't planning on playing her today. Alright. Ibuki it is. Unfortunately, beyond my own personal experience from playing her, not much there either.
That said, we have been poking at Ibuki bot, so the main aspects of can I defend against this character are somewhat taken off the table. This is not going to help you against a high level Ibuki. It's more so that you're trying to buy yourself the maximum amount of time to figure out what you're doing in the other parts of the match where you still have some control over what's going on.
I did not know I could anti-air with that. New third favorite thing.
That sort of moment is actually really important. If you are calm enough to recognize, oh wait, what did I just do? But your mind is not so overwhelmed as to have trouble recalling it, you might be able to learn a new thing, a new trick. Is it possible that just using Otoshi from far away whenever Ibuki jumps from far is a thing? Does this just work? It might not hit her, but if you're not focused specifically on making sure you hit her every time, this might have a function that you can at least expand on.
And it looks like it certainly is at least somewhat evasive. I would guess that I'm high enough in the air relative to her that if she doesn't deploy a kunai at the top of her jump, she's not going to be deploying one on the way down. Well, not one that hits me. So I might experiment with this a little.
Round one. Fight.
Assuming I ever get back to that point in the match.
The other interesting thing about this is what it opens up for you. If you understand enough about a character and take away one of their tools, you will understand that they must use a different one that then becomes something you know how to counter. One strong example here is that once you've taken away that very long jump from Ibuki, she has no real strong ways in on Sakura in the first place. So there isn't a whole lot that Konosuke Dynasty needs to worry about. Ibuki's just not a character that is really good at getting in on Sakura. She gets air thrown, she gets anti-aired with back heavy punch, or apparently now, she has to deal with Otoshi stuff. Meaning that while you can't necessarily play far out way back, the character needs to find a way to get to the space where her jump arc is in some way ambiguous or scary. But if she can't ever get there, then you just end up walking her right down to the corner and winning. And you can generally expect Ibuki to jump because she is that character. She isn't really trying to play footsies with you for the most part. She's not terrible at it, but she's not the best footsie character in the game here. She is trying to use her aerial mobility and ambiguous movement to get to a position where you won't be expecting her, as most ninja characters do. But if you can completely control where she's going to go and don't attack her randomly yourself to cause that moment, because an Ibuki player is more than likely the sort of player who is in motion. They're not waiting for you to come to them, because they know that once you have started to move, they get to start to move. And when you end up in an ambiguous situation, this type of character almost always has some advantage. So, you don't have to play completely quiet, but you can definitely spend a lot of time walking them down, making sure that you understand your positioning relative to them. Spacing is a strong tool against this character, and Sakura is quite capable of doing it. Unlike Karin or Cammy, who will at least have to respect a certain type of movement from Ibuki because they can't do anything about it from that range, Sakura actually has a lot of options. And at worst, even if they don't get her to really good positions, they will get her into a position where she has a similar form of the scramble, but she has invincible moves and better footsies, so it's relatively easy.
Aren't Sakura and Ibuki's invincible options the same?
Round one. Fight.
I thought they both only had the EXDP.
Right, but Sakura's EXDP runs at people. Ibuki just kind of goes up in the air. It's not all that great in terms of range.
That's
if you
true.
both hit EXDP, I'm pretty sure Sakura wins.
Fair point. This, boys and girls, is why it's occasionally good to have your strange thoughts out loud, so you can see why what you thought was perfectly reasonable is not. And then you get to do things.
Round two. Fight.
Interestingly, in my observation, I've been thinking a lot about this match, and I don't really want to say anything that is strongly against high-level conventional wisdom here, but I really feel like Necalli does not benefit from his V-trigger in this matchup. He just wants to V-reverse Ryu off him all the time. Because Ryu doesn't do that well against Necalli in the Fireball game in the sense of, oh, I'm getting a big advantage, because Necalli gets to do damage and build up V-meter, whereas Ryu basically gets to do some damage. They both hit each other, but who is benefiting in what way tends to shift quite a lot. But Ryu doesn't do as well when Necalli is constantly re-reversaling him off. He definitely can try to, for example, bait the V-reversal so he can throw, but that means that he usually has to move in a way that Necalli can easily anti-air him. So while you should not take this to be an actual strategy that I'm offering to use for this character, I would definitely say if you're having trouble with this matchup as Necalli, that you might want to investigate it, because I can't think of a really good reason why you don't just want to V-reversal Ryu constantly. Part of the reason for this was actually shown a little bit ago. Ryu has a good benefit from hitting like perfectly spaced full solar plexus strike or 2 stand medium punches in a row. But as far as I know, Necalli doesn't actually get thrown if he V-reversals these moves. He might not land the V-reversal if he's slow, but basically Ryu has relatively canned pressure strings. He's not a really tricky pressure string character. They're either effective or not most of the time. And the ability to just then negate them is possibly useful. It also puts Ryu in a situation where he's often going to be expecting to be V-reversaled and block, just in case the V-reversal was late. But this means that he can get command grabbed.
Sounds like a favorable situation for Necalli.
However, I would think, having done none of the actual testing on this, that there's probably only a few situations in which this is a good idea. Spacing-wise, probably only a few situations where it's a good idea. But on the other hand, Necalli's command grab is a bit of a problem to other people, despite being quite slow. I believe it starts in 8, as compared to most command grabs which start in 5 or something. But if your opponent is really going to be blocking, you don't really care anymore. Command grabs are not something that people get out of on reaction, and you can't tech them, so down you go.
Round 1. Fight!
Well, let's return to trying to control Ibuki somewhat. This is another character where Sakura basically benefits from the V-reversal a bit more than she does, well no, in this case, a lot more than she does from the V-trigger. Minimizing Ibuki's damage is a fairly reasonable way to win this fight. And being able to V-reversal her out of a ton of things helps because Sakura's V-reversal specifically is a clear knockdown. It's not a knockback, it's not a you're okay now. You can't end up anywhere near your opponent after this. In fact, it pushes her so far back that you might as well consider a reset to the situation you were just at unwanted. Namely, you have control, Ibuki can't necessarily walk at you, you have to wait for her to jump. If you watch carefully, the player mostly is just either dashing or jumping, or hitting a button to push themselves back to the space where dashing and jumping become good ideas. There's not really a lot of footsies going on here, and when it is attempted, aside from very specific timings of V-skill stuff, Sakura tends to win. In fact, part of the reason why we do not make an Ibuki bot that fights like this is because the CPU Ibuki basically fights like this. So, as is standard, our bots are generally meant to cover something that the CPU just doesn't seem to do correctly, or because of its ability to read your inputs, tends to be almost impossible to actually stop. But fortunately, jumps are not really a problem in that department most of the time. Unless the character has some way to guarantee the success of their jump through some other move, some slow-moving projectile or similar, you don't really have to think about that. You just anti-air or you don't. What will often happen is that they'll jump from the perfect space or not jump at all. But the Ibuki CPU, as this is one of her primary game plans, doesn't actually have this problem. It just jumps. Sometimes it jumps from spaces where it will cross you up, and you have to be quite careful and understand what you're doing, but it mostly just jumps. Therefore, our Ibuki bot actually doesn't, as far as I remember, have a single jump input in it, other than like one specific one that's meant to help it get into the air. There's air dash into kunai, but if it does have a jump, it's very well hidden and does not happen a whole lot.
Round 2. Fight.
I probably did just deny like 200 damage by way of V-reversal there. Let's... Even if I couldn't get rid of the whole thing.
Figuring out which thing is first for your character in a matchup can be difficult. So until you know this from experience, just put all three down and keep them as approximately even. And then you can think about it. You can research it, or you can go back through it on your own time, thinking about what is it I want to do in matchups in general, and which of those things am I being stopped from doing. In Hanzuki Dynasty's case, it's often that she wants to play footsies, but if the opponent doesn't have any intention of doing that, she often must default to anti-airing constantly because they want to jump and not play footsies, and therefore you have to anti-air them until they stop doing that, so they have to play footsies. Usually this doesn't help too much because they just want to continue doing that, but Ibuki is one of the few characters that gets to break part of that mold. Normally, if you just don't want to play footsies, you don't have a long enough range air attack to disrespect things in that way. You get air to air either by air throw or jumping medium punch, and you have to deal with it. Ibuki doesn't have this problem, meaning that the Otoshi might in fact be the first thing that matters in this matchup, because it forces the opponent to move close enough to get air thrown or get jump medium punch, or some other option. And she's quite happy to air throw, so if you counter one and they move to the next, then so be it. Moving from Ryu to a different zoner, Sagat is not quite the same. You don't necessarily want to V-reversal Sagat off you as Necalli. In fact, most of the time you just want to command grab him immediately. This I am confident in saying, even though it's a really strange thing for Sagat to face, as he does have some good options in this situation. The problem with Sagat is that unlike Ryu, he doesn't get as much off of using those options in the long term. He wants to zone you out, so if he puts himself in a situation close to you in any way that isn't advantage, and you go for the command grab on Necalli, his best option most of the time is to hit a combo that doesn't hurt that much, or uppercut. The reversal to get him off you, therefore, can at least be weighed in the standard sense if you consider that Necalli gets any benefit from being in the trigger in this matchup. And that's something you should think about on your own time. My opinion is that they're about the same, and it doesn't really require you to think one way or the other.
Sagat wins. Round 1. Fight.
As you've also seen there, Nakali's crouch light kick is decent in this matchup because of the way that he and Sagat tend to interact. While the move leads into basically nothing and is not helpful for dealing damage, it is preventative of quite a lot of damage. Not normally a move you'd want to see used on Nakali too much. Most people don't move slowly enough, nor are they disadvantaged enough that this is, hey, I should hit this button now. But for whatever reason, I can't even be sure what it is other than possibly slow walk speed. Sagat has to deal with this button a lot.
Sagat wins.
Now you'd think that, well, he'd just block it, it's not advantaged or anything, but if Sagat is thinking too much about blocking Nakali's crouch light kick, he's probably not playing the game he wants to play in the first place.
Let's do this.
There are a lot of things that Sagat needs and wants to do in matchups with close range pressury characters that mean that he has to move around just a little bit or take a risk. He doesn't really want to be in that close. If he was particularly good close up, he'd be not only closer to Ryu as a character, but phenomenally stronger, honestly. In fact, Sagat players, and therefore by extension our Sagat bot, seem to be more effective when they are willing to hit lights when very close, just to get control of the situation. They're not actually trying to hit you, they don't want to open you up, they expect you to block it. But what they want is to be somewhere else.
Round one.
Alright, so back to the Atoshis and such. Can I do it from this range? Ah, if she walks back, then possibly.
But in general, you should remember, Ibuki does not usually want to play footsies until the player is quite a bit better. Therefore, the only thing you should ever be looking for is for them to jump. Ever! Never stop looking for the jump.
Round two.
The moment you do, the moment you try to hit her on the ground, she will be off it, and as soon as she's off it, you will die. There are entire matches you can watch the replays of that are just that are just Ibuki doing a string and then jumping. If you played at lower levels for quite a while, you're very used to this from Ken, but Ibuki's much better at it, so you have to be really on point with her.
Not quite what I want to do there. Alright,
In fact,
so...
if we look at this match, it's basically that.
Indeed.
Kanzaki Dynasty attempts to hit a button on the ground in footsies to do something, literally anything. Stand heavy kick, Hadouken, crouch medium kick, it doesn't matter. As soon as the opponent sees you move, all they have to do is press up forward.
That is in fact
This
my
is
main problem.
particularly dangerous for ninja characters as a general thing.
Round one. Fight.
I struggle with doing nothing. And I'm not sure what else to be doing in this positioning, so that quickly becomes a problem for me. Because I'll do basically anything and then suddenly be in her jump range. Or I'll get myself stuck into the Atoshi loop, which is not useful when she's not jumping, which is part of the problem. And why I need to make sure that I write down the situation, not just the move, for instance, in that level.
When you find yourself in these situations with a footsie character, your best bet is often to hit your stand-like kick. It makes the opponent do the jump, but also tends to recover quickly enough that you can do your anti-air.
Aha. Well, that is also going to need to go in my notes.
Particularly your stand-like kick, as seeing standing moves often makes the opponent feel more comfortable, because they just generally expect that a standing move, if it doesn't hit them, they're going to hit you when they jump. So fake it, throw out a couple, make them jump that way, and then quickly anti-air, or in some cases just dash forward if you feel as if they were too close.
Let's do this.
Alright, and with all that, it's about the usual time, and so this will be our last match of the evening. As usual, if you are interested in any of the bots or other such things that you have heard about on our stream today, you can find them at 2-mk.org/bots. We also have some Unist bots and other content that we've put out on our webpage even just recently at 2-mk.org. If you want to get a reminder to stop in for stream next week, same time, same place, or to join in any of our other lobbies, which we have a tendency to run, sometimes Guilty Gear, often Dragon Ball Fighters, or even just find out about more Unist bot content that we may get into if we have the research done for it. You can find out more about all of those things on our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC.
Round two. Fight.
As noted, tomorrow we'll be trying to get the Tuesday train on the rails again. Going into training for various upcoming tournaments in the spring and start of summer. We have been specifically working on Unist bots instead, meaning that there has been a little less Guilty Gear action. After all, you do need some night to actually do that, and some night to probably take a break and play something else after doing that for a long time. But this week we've decided to shift it the other way and instead do without the Wednesday stream, i.e. there will be no Sandbag Casuals on Wednesday, as we will be once again working on Unist bots, and trust me, you don't really want to see all of the nonsense we get up to, so we're not going to be streaming that. It's either this does not work at all, or me arrogantly talking about how much of a genius I am because it worked instantly. And y'all get to hear enough of that as is.
I can attest to the factual accuracy of this. It does tend to go that way.
On Thursday we will be having Kame House as usual. Our Neither stays on. Dragon Ball Fighters lobby. I'm getting really attached to this Neither stays on thing and may petition other people to actually use that. I wish you could just tell people to like make development shifts. Eunice has something like that, but I haven't figured out exactly what it should do just yet. But Street Fighter, you need to step up your game, at least have loser stays on. On Friday, we should in fact have something ready because in all of our testing, in all of our poking around, we were able to confirm that Gordo, Hilda, and Nanase do not in fact work all that well with the Byakuya type inputs, but we definitely have got some stuff based on that that is relatively similar and seems to be much more useful, so we'll be trying to start off from there. You're more likely to get Nanase and Hilda than anything else, I believe. They may share inputs, they may not, and yet we may still release them both, depending on what it is. The stream for this guidance tends to be a little shorter when you don't have a lot of bots to show off, and as we continually move toward having all the bots, we will have less and less parts of this guidance that are just, hey, if you want to try out this one with these inputs, go ahead. Meaning that we'll cut down on those parts of it and possibly get more than one if we find that the input is really easy to change midstream. So I'd say look out for that on Friday. You may end up with just one, or in the worst case, we find it all falls apart after a couple of inputs and somebody managed to find, oh look, when you try to put this in, it doesn't work all that well. Leading to us having to scrap that in some form or shift it.
Round 2. Fight.
And of course, nothing seems to be in the way, so we expect to be back next week with another Mishmashing Battle Lounge. Whether or not it will be Mishmash or Mix and Mash as you have today is usually only decided at the last moment, honestly. Depends on the status of teams. You might be able to know for sure by Friday, but there's no way to know today. As it is Mix and Mash this week, Lounge will not necessarily be staying open. It may not be possible to find any given player. We are most likely moving on to something else at this point, but if you see any of the names around, feel free to join us.
You win.
Beyond that though, this has been Rillian,
And
along
Kanzuki
with the
Dynasty.
Kanzuki Dynasty, 14 to MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.
Round 1. Fight.
Alright. Very last round. Let's go. But as for all of the rest of you,
Round 2. Fight.
Have a good night.